Hi, Kevin Green here. Welcome to Pathways to the Past. We're late into October. That gets us into the spooky season, so I thought I'd bring you a bit of a mystery with maybe a bit of a spooky feel to it. About 8 or 10 years ago, I was doing research for collecting local ghost stories and that sort of thing. And I was approached by a friend that grew up here in the Boulevards area of Seymour. And he asked me if I knew anything about a tombstone that was by the railroad tracks in this area. That's the first I'd ever heard of it. So I asked him to tell me what he knew. So like I said, he grew up in the 1960s here in the Boulevards area of Seymour. And he remembered seeing a tombstone along the what then would be the B&O railroad tracks, which run east and west through Seymour. It was on the north side of the railroad tracks, on this side, the boulevard side. And it was along behind an old feed store that was set back there. It's actually on a street that's called Maple Avenue, which not too many people have actually heard of. It's a little known street that's about a half a block to the south of West 2nd Street. It runs from Elm down to, I guess, about Carter Boulevard. And it acts more like an alley for houses along 2nd Street for the most part. But there used to be the feed store that's set along there called the Hoosier Feed. And the story that as he remembered it, was there was a tombstone along the railroad embankment behind that feed store. And he distinctly remembered the name on the tombstone as being Peggy Purdue. Purdue spelled P-U-R-D-U-E, like the Purdue University. And that's all they could recall about it. So I tried doing research on it, and I found a number of people that grew up in this area at the same time period, and apparently it was pretty well known amongst the younger people in the boulevards in the 1960s. But like a lot of stories of this nature, you get many variations of what they remember. I had some people who remember it being a tombstone planted as a normal tombstone would be along the base of the railroad tracks. Now the railroad through that area is on a steep embankment like it is in the whole west end of Seymour. I had some people who remember it just laying down along that embankment. I found reports of it being actually located underneath an old loading dock that was behind the feed store. And I even had one story that said that it was being used as a stair step to get into a back door of the feed store. And perhaps through the years it was all these different things at different times. Maybe it was standing and then it was knocked over and eventually moved somehow to the back of the feed store. I did find a scan online of an old receipt from that feed store, and it was dated May the 24th, 1969. It was for 25 pounds of dog food for $1.85, which is interesting. But on the back of the receipt, it had a handwritten note. So I'll read that note. It says, "While I was buying dog food, a discussion was about a stone, in parentheses, grave marker, had fallen off a B&O train and rolled down the hill, landing at the feed store. It had been placed in their basement. The name is Peggy Purdue. July 13th, 25, I assume it's 1925. July 26, 1938, which would put the person at about 13 years old, I guess." I did find one story who had heard that it was a local girl who was hit by the train, and they decided to pay for her burial and just buried her on the spot. But that seems pretty unlikely that that would have happened like that. I tried doing research on my own and honestly didn't come up with a whole lot of information. I tried looking for that name specifically pertaining to those dates and haven't come up with anything. The location of this is just a few blocks over from here, so let's walk down there and I'll show you where this would have been located. Here we are on Maple Avenue. Carter Boulevard goes that direction to the north. This is the back side of Brooklyn Pizza here. Just to give you an idea where I am. We got a whole row of new houses built along this street now. But back when the feed store was here, there were no houses back here. And I can remember seeing the feed store standing. It wasn't in business at that time, but that was maybe 15 years ago, maybe 20 at the most. And I remember it sitting down close to Elm Street be on the south side of Maple Avenue. But the railroad embankment is along that tree line back through there. Let's walk over and take a closer look there. So this is the base of the railroad embankment with the tracks way up there. And it's pretty overgrown. Now when I first heard about this, about 10 years ago maybe, I came over here and none of these houses were built yet. And I walked along the edge down at the bottom at the base of the embankment and along the top by the railroad tracks, and didn't spot the Tombstone. I suppose it could be possible that it's still in there somewhere. But I would think it is probably more likely that when they tore down the feed store, that if it was still there at that point, they probably just hauled it away with the rubble, which is kind of a shame, I guess. If you go down this way, used to be Swain Industry that set down through there. I remember it all still being there not too long ago, actually. And interestingly enough, where that new building sits there, used to be a cheese factory at one time. Walk down here to Elm Street, Elm and Maple Avenue. And we got all these new houses built here, so you can't really see the embankment even or anything. But if I remember right, the feed store was probably right in this location here. So that's all I have on the story of the Tombstone by the tracks and Peggy Purdue. Of course, if you remember seeing the stone or if you've heard anything about it, I'd sure like to hear from you. I mean, if you're able to do research better than myself and come up with some information on Peggy Purdue and who she was or why her tombstone was there. I have a feeling that it probably did fall off of a train coming through town. But besides that, I really don't know. It's just the rest of the story is a mystery. So, like this video if you care to, subscribe to me. I hope to have more videos coming out soon. And of course, if you have any information on this story, I'd like to hear from you. Thanks. Have a good day. Bye.